Greetings and welcome back. I'm Steve Clemons, editor-at-large of The Hill. This is session 2 of our big summit, The Race and Justice Imperative. I'd like to thank our sponsor, Alexion Pharmaceuticals, for making today's conversations possible. In our first session, we discussed how systemic racism, how stereotyping, how bias have led to continued injustice for the black community, and basically every community in the United States is basically given a raw deal in this. In our second session, we will discuss how we can rebuild societal structures for equity. As we acknowledge the need for change, we're also going to understand that what we look like and look across different sectors of our society in policymaking and hiring and civil rights and business, housing, education, everywhere in daily life. We need to take a look at all of this. To help us understand how we can make real change, we have an absolutely outstanding lineup of civil rights leaders, change makers, thought leaders, social entrepreneurs. And I'm joined once again by Marty Johnson, the Hill's politics reporter. He's a pretty cool dude. It's first time, Marty. Thank you for joining us today. I hope you're having fun.
It's a great time.
Yeah,
it's great to be out of the house.
It's good stuff. Before we get underway, a few housekeeping notes. You can tweet us at The Hill Events using the hashtag TheHillBHM, Black History Month, The Hill BHM. We're broadcasting live. We'll take your questions throughout the program. And if you have any trouble with your live stream, just push refresh, and I promise it'll all just be perfect. So I hope it works. Over to you, Marty.
Thanks, Steve. We are joined now by 3 U.S. mayors to discuss approaches they are taking to tackle systemic racism, inequality, and biases in their communities. Each are the first black American to serve as their city's mayor. Stephen Reed is the mayor of Montgomery, Alabama. He was the state's youngest elected probate judge and recently was named to the Department of Homeland Security's Elections Integrity Commission. Melvin Carter is the mayor of St. Paul, Minnesota. Since his election in 2018, as part of his equity agenda, he has raised the city's minimum wage to $15 an hour, expanded immigrant and refugee support resources, and launched an Office of Financial Empowerment. Ella Jones is the mayor of Ferguson, Missouri. Before being elected in 2020, she was Ferguson's first black city council member. We are so happy to welcome all of you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
My first question is for Mayor Jones. The police killings of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd this past summer sparked national unrest, protests, and we saw the return to national prominence of the Black Lives Matter movement. I'm personally from St. Louis. I was a senior in high school when Mike Brown was killed in Ferguson. For you, I think, at least for me, I noticed that this movement seemed different. There seemed to be more staying power. It was harder for people to ignore. So for you, who have gone through both, was personal in 2014, what do you think is different from what we saw last summer?
Well, what is different, we have a lot of our young people have mobilized, and they're mobilized from every group. You have your Hispanics, your non-whites, your brown people. All of them are coming together for one purpose. They have made it up in their mind that they're not going to tolerate the injustice, and taken to the streets as a group of young people, it makes a big difference. And
since 2014, there's been significant changes that have happened in Ferguson. You being elected as the city's first black city council member led to more city council members being black and being on the council. What do you think, what are some of those changes that you've seen?
Well, first of all, the people wanted to have a voice. They were sick, when you're sick and tired of being sick and tired, you get up and do something. So they got up and they went to the polls and they voted. They voted to have a voice. They voted for someone who was going to listen to them, encourage them, and empower them to take charge of their community and stabilize their community. We have seen a lot of entrepreneurs come here to Ferguson to open businesses, but more importantly, the people who live here are working to better their own neighborhoods.
And when it comes to reform, Mayor Carter, George Floyd was killed in your sister city of Minneapolis. The Minneapolis City Council in December voted to divert $8 million from the police budget to social services and violence prevention. What are some things that you've worked, a lot on law enforcement reform? What are some things? Do you have something like that in the mix?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the question. And it's good to be here with two mayors who I see as heroes who do incredible work. Absolutely. One of the most, I think, shocking and horrific things about George Floyd's murder was how historically unsurprising it is. And so our work in that space started far before that. Frankly, it's one of the reasons I wanted to be mayor in the first place. And so we're working around what we call our community first public safety framework that says we need a much more proactive approach. If you think about public safety in America, when we talk about our public safety systems, we're always talking about prisons, police, and prosecutors, which none of which take effect until after something terrible has happened. When we think about keeping our children safe, it's all about preventing something terrible from happening in the first place. And so that's our approach, is to, one, invest in proactive investments in the people and the places that we know are most likely to be impacted by crime and violence. We've learned in this pandemic that when we identify, and I see gun violence as a pandemic, that when we identify the people and places that are highest risk, those are the people and places that we ought to get the most resources to the quickest. We've learned that, we've rehearsed that in our response to COVID. But then the other piece is changing the dynamic of the police relationship with our community members. One of the things we've seen is that sometimes when people call 911, it's because of some issue of crime and violence, and there's no substitute for a police presence. Most of the time, actually, when people call 911, it's because there's some concern or someone's in crisis in some non-violent, non-emergency, and oftentimes non-criminal thing that people are calling 911 because they need help. And so our goal is to identify, we're doing this work right now, to identify the capacity we need in terms of social workers, mental health responders, chemical health, emergency, housing providers, and those types of things, who can actually bring the resource that people need to get out of the cycles of crisis, while also freeing our officers to focus on the more acute kind of issues of crime and violence that occur in our community. Again, this is our community first public safety framework, and it's our notion that just responding as quick as possible after something terrible has happened is not at all sufficient to keeping a city safe.
And you talked about getting resources to the people that need it the most. And that's been a large crux and a large problem with the COVID-19 pandemic that has also ran parallel to what's happened last summer. Mayor Reed in Montgomery is providing transportation to vaccine centers for people who need it. Have you seen that as a positive, and how has that helped get people who need the vaccine most the vaccine?
Well, it's been important. Certainly from our end, it's something that we know there are barriers to transportation. We know there are barriers for people getting to the vaccination sites. And so we've been trying to work with private transportation providers, as well as increase our role through our public transportation system to address those needs. But we also are working with churches. We're working with other faith-based organizations, as well as volunteers, fraternities and sororities, and others that are assisting us. But one of the things when it comes to, COVID-19 is also, educating and informing our community about why it's important to get the vaccinations, to understand some of the challenges that have been there, not only through healthcare disparities, but also through, the history of healthcare in this country relative to Black people. And it's a very different story than it is for many others across this nation, in particular here in Montgomery. We're only about 30 minutes from Tuskegee, Alabama, where the Tuskegee syphilis experiment obviously still hovers over the memories of many people, and that's been passed down to generations. So we're trying to overcome that from an information perspective as well as an implementation perspective. And I think learning from mayors like Mayor Jones and Mayor Carter are things that, we try to see what one another's doing. We try to see, are there things that we can do a little bit better to serve our residents here? Because in the end, really, I have no authorship on any of the ideas that I have. I'm only interested in the outcomes. And that's what we're trying to provide as it relates to all of the support that we've given for COVID-19. And if I can just kind of tag on one point to what Mayor
Sure.
Carter brought up, the social services piece is very important when it comes to many of the challenges that we're dealing with, whether it's Montgomery, Ferguson, or St. Paul. And often that gets overlooked. Often we kind of focus on those hard expenses and we don't think of the soft expenses, mental health care, crisis intervention teams. And we don't think about the importance and the impact of those services, in particular for people who do not have health care. So it's important that when we talk about some of the challenges, we talk, at a macro level, but also at a micro level in ways that I think mayors around the country are trying to fill in the gaps that have been left there by, just absence of policy or absence of courage or will.
And you brought up your city's proximity to Tuskegee, where the Tuskegee study happened for 4 decades, and the hurt and the pain that still exists from that study and other studies on the Black community without their consent. When it comes to having a robust education around the vaccine, and letting people know that, hey, it's safe to get the vaccine. This is what you need to do to keep you and your community safe. And this is a question for all 3 of you. What kind of programs do you have along that line to educate your communities?
From my end, what we're doing is we see this as a public information campaign. All of us are first in our cities, and we all bring a sense of political activism to the table. And so we know how to campaign. We know how to touch our voters and touch our residents and try to get information to them. And no different than when we're running for office or we're running to get something on the ballot or to support an initiative, we're using the same approaches from our churches, our social media, our traditional media, of course, and we're using grassroots. We're knocking on doors. We're using those community leaders that know people and can reach people in a way that maybe I can't because they have the trust, they have the bond. So we're trying to take a full-fledged approach to this, no different than we would if I were running for re-election. And we're trying to hope that we can get to even more people that will vote for me that might take the vaccine, because we want to get 100% of residents in Montgomery to do that. And we're trying to use every way possible across the board. And we're using all the talent that we have, from our young professionals, some of our teens on social media, to some of our elders who have more traditional ways of calling their peers and their church members and trying to get the word out.
Well, here in Ferguson, it's 68% African American, and we are in North County. And it has been a very, very slow response to people taking the vaccination. So what we did, we partnered with County Executive Sam Page, open up a vaccination center here at the junior college to have people to come in and register for the vaccination, doing an educational campaign out there, making certain people get the correct information about the vaccine. In addition to that, we put together a stakeholder group, pastors, teachers, lay people, everyone coming together, make certain that education is out there, and having our political leaders, our church leaders take the vaccination on television. I did myself, took it on television. And when I got finished, by the time I made it back to my office, we had taken in an additional 100 telephone calls from people saying, well, Mayor Johnson, you took it, we're going to take it too.
Right.
So it's getting that trusted voice out there. People will follow the trusted voices. And when they know that their leader is taking the vaccine, they will be more apt to take it themselves.
We're seeing exactly the same thing, and we're doing the same things. I haven't received the vaccine yet, We're still trying to get it to our frontline responders, so our police officers, our firefighters, certainly our nurses and teachers and folks like that in our community. But ensuring that we have access to it and ensuring that people know that they can get it, ensuring that we have the capacity that we need. We're a city of 315,000 people. So to get that many people vaccinated, how many do we have to do a week? How many people do we have to do a month? What are our goals and how are we holding ourselves accountable to those goals? I've been frustrated, frankly. My father is a senior citizen, Navy veteran, and had to drive 40 minutes to get his shot in the suburbs. That's not acceptable. And so, we are working hard to bring more capacity online, working with our governor, working with folks to bring more capacity online to ensure that we're able to kind of respond in some of those ways. To your point, though, this has got to be about providing resources and connecting people to the resources that we know that they need. Right now, we've seen across our country homelessness skyrocket.
Right.
We've seen unemployment skyrocket, hunger, social isolation skyrocket. We've seen crime skyrocket, and everybody wants to talk about that, but it really should be no surprise. Those other things I just described are always the factors that have led to neighborhood crime. And so hopefully we're finally at a space, and this I think goes right back to our conversation about public safety reform. Hopefully we're finally at a space where we understand, based on the events that have happened in this last year, crime has gone up because hunger has gone up, because homelessness has gone up, because poverty has gone up, because unemployment has gone up, because of social isolation has gone up. If we want to reduce crime, we need much more than more police officers. We need to address all of those issues which cause the crime to increase in the first place. Right now, our top public safety priority, our top educational priority, our top economic jobs priority is getting shots in arms.
Right. Well, thank you all so much. My colleague Steve has a quick question for you guys.
Hey, everybody. Steve Clemons with The Hill. I've been enjoying this conversation very much. Mayor Carter and I talked a few years ago when I was at the Atlantic. We had Pete Buttigieg on the panel talking about what cities were doing. And a lot of these, I guess the question I want to ask you, and I'm going to try to figure out how to ask this. We do a lot of work with the Conference of U.S. Mayors. And I hear the DEFCON level from all of you is very high on the issues we're talking about. I guess my question to you is, how do you feel other cities, particularly in organizations like the Conference of U.S. Is this high on the agenda, or is this a marginalized set of issues on the agenda? And then when you kind of look at the things you need to change, I always ask myself, if we come back in a few years, will we have solved any of this stuff? Will we have moved it forward? And I'd just love to get a snapshot, because we have a lot of folks listening. We have folks from the Conference of U.S. Mayors listening. So, does this need to be amped up in that world?
Yes, it is. So mayors are on the front line, right?
Yeah.
No matter what Washington, D.C. does, no matter how politically partisan gridlock you see in Washington, D.C. or at state capitals, mayors are always knee deep in neighborhoods and knee deep with community and face to face with people and families. And so every mayor I know, these types of issues we're talking about are a top priority for. But the thing is, we also have to know that where housing is concerned, where homelessness is concerned, where unemployment is concerned, we operate cities that operate within regions and metropolitan areas. And so a lot of these challenges end up converging into the city. Homelessness is a great example. If you find yourself losing housing in a greater Minnesota area, in a suburb or a rural area that doesn't have housing resources, you go into the city where there are resources. So our cities end up holding with a small amount, a finite amount of local resources, trying to hold up the world for a whole region or a whole state on so many issues that it becomes unsustainable. So I think mayors are focused on this, and I think mayors need more help coming from the federal government, need more help coming from our states to be able to produce sustainable solutions and not just be constantly sort of chasing the problems.
Mayor Reed, Mayor Jones, quick thoughts?
Well, we do need solutions, and we do need them from the federal government, and we need them to the point that they're accessible. We don't have to fill out 200 pages to state that we need aid to people who are hungry, who are homeless, who are facing eviction. If the federal government is willing to help the mayors in the small cities, the big cities, they need to cut out all of that red tape and give us the help that we need now, because the people are hurting now. We have a big food giveaway on Saturday here with the Urban League, and we are expected to serve 4,000 families. That's too many. That's too many. But we need the government to step up and give us the funding that we need without so much red tape.
Mayor Reed, thank you, Mayor Jones. Mayor Reed, quick thoughts. And, you know, I think I love that you're in your car, and thank you. It's great TV.
Thanks. It's one of those where we're in between meetings here, and I'm trying to get from one point to the next. But listen, I'll make it very short. Mayor Carter, Mayor Jones have summed it all up for me. I couldn't agree more, and I couldn't have said it any better than they've just laid it out. And I do think the U.S. Conference of Mayors, as well as the African American Mayors Association, have this at the top of their agenda. And I know the National League of Cities and other groups are working on this as well. But they summed it all up, and I certainly concur with their sentiments.
Well, thank you guys so much. Mayors Jones, Reed, and Carter, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your insight and speaking your truth.
Thank you.
Thank you.